When a dismissive avoidant and you both go silent, what happens next? Have you ever had a moment where the silence between you and someone you care about feels so heavy, it's almost louder than words? You both stop reaching out and suddenly you're not sure if you're giving space or watching something die quietly. Let's talk about that silence, because when a dismissive, avoidant person goes quiet and you match that silence, something very specific happens. It's not just a pause, it's a power shift. The dismissive avoidant is used to retreating to feel safe. Their silence is control. It's how they regulate overwhelming emotion, by withdrawing. But when you stop chasing, stop fixing, stop proving, something unexpected happens. At first, they might feel relief. Finally, no pressure. Then, slowly, curiosity creeps in. Wait, why isn't this person reaching out? Have they moved on? Do they not need me anymore? And this is where the dynamic starts to change. See, your silence can either become a mirror or a wall. If your quiet is resentful, it pushes them further. But if your quiet is peaceful, self-respecting, grounded, it becomes magnetic. It's the difference between silent punishment and silent confidence. The real question isn't what happens when you both go silent. It's who you become in that silence. Do you use it to self-destruct in your head, replaying every text, every moment? Or do you use it to reconnect with your center, with your value, your boundaries, your calm? Because silence is a test. And the person who handles the quiet with self-respect always wins the long game. Silence is never just silence, it's communication. Subtle, powerful, and often louder than words. When two people stop talking, what lingers in that quiet space between them is full of meaning. The mistake most people make is thinking that silence is a neutral zone, a kind of emotional waiting room where nothing is happening. But in reality, silence always speaks. The question is, what is it saying on your behalf? When you go silent after tension or disconnection, your energy still transmits something. Maybe it's peace, that kind of grounded calm that says, I'm not angry, I'm just centered, I don't need to chase, I'm okay. Or maybe it's punishment, that cold, sharp quiet that says, I'm hurt, but I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to make you feel it instead. The difference between those two is enormous. One invites curiosity and respect. The other builds resentment and distance. Think about the energy behind your quiet moments. If you're sitting in silence but internally screaming for them to notice, that silence isn't really silence. It's noise disguised as calm. You might be telling yourself, I'm not going to text first, but you're still emotionally tethered, waiting for a reaction. The dismissive avoidant will feel that energy even if you never say a word. Their instinct is to sense emotional pressure, and they pull away the moment they feel it. So even your unspoken need can push them further. But when your silence comes from true composure, when you're no longer performing stillness but living it, that's when it starts to communicate something new. It says, I'm not withdrawing to hurt you. I'm simply choosing peace. This kind of silence doesn't chase, but it doesn't close off either. It's not icy, it's warm but firm. It doesn't demand, it allows. And that allowance can be deeply unsettling for someone who's used to control through distance. The irony is that a dismissive avoidant often expects your silence to come with strings attached. They anticipate the guilt messages, the long paragraphs, the emotional aftermath. When none of that arrives, it disrupts their pattern. Suddenly they're left to sit with themselves, their own thoughts, their own discomfort. That space you created becomes a mirror, showing them something new, that your connection doesn't revolve around their withdrawal anymore. You've stepped out of the game. Your silence can either say, I'm punishing you by withholding attention, or I trust that I don't have to fight for your effort. One comes from fear, the other from self-worth. The first feeds the cycle of anxiety and avoidance. The second quietly ends it. It's not about playing mind games or being cold. It's about recognizing that your silence carries a message, whether you mean it to or not. So when you both go quiet, let your stillness reflect security, not suffering. Let it show that you're not waiting to be chosen. You're already choosing yourself, because in relationships, words are optional, but energy is never silent. When someone with a dismissive, avoidant attachment style goes quiet, it's easy to assume they're playing games, trying to manipulate or intentionally ignoring you. But that's rarely what's happening. Their silence is not a calculated move to hurt or control you. It's a form of emotional self-protection. It's the only way they've learned to feel safe when emotions start to feel overwhelming or threatening. For them, closeness can sometimes trigger panic rather than comfort. Where others might crave connection in moments of tension, a dismissive avoidant feels suffocated by it. So their instinct is to retreat, to find control through distance. This reaction often begins long before adulthood. Somewhere along the way, they learned that vulnerability led to disappointment, that needing someone brought pain, or that emotions weren't met with care. So they built walls, not out of cruelty, but out of survival. Those walls became their safety. Silence for them is not punishment, it's refuge. When things feel emotionally charged, when expectations rise, or when they sense the possibility of criticism, they withdraw. It's the emotional equivalent of taking shelter during a storm. The problem is, from the outside, that silence feels like abandonment. If you're on the receiving end of that withdrawal, it can feel deeply personal. You might think, they don't care, or I wasn't enough. But that interpretation only deepens the emotional gap. The truth is, their silence says more about their fear than your worth. When emotions rise, their internal system screams too much, too fast, too risky. Pulling away is their nervous system's way of restoring balance. The stillness they create is not about punishing you. It's about protecting themselves from emotional exposure they don't yet know how to handle. Understanding this doesn't mean tolerating neglect or dismissing your own needs. It simply means separating intent from impact. Their silence may hurt you, but the intention behind it isn't to wound, it's to survive. When you see this clearly, you can respond with clarity instead of confusion. Instead of chasing their attention or demanding explanations, you can meet their withdrawal with grounded patience. Not because you're excusing it, but because you recognize it for what it is. Fear, not rejection. Ironically, the more you pressure an avoidant during their retreat, the deeper they go. They read emotional pursuit as danger, not love. But when they sense that you're not chasing, that you can hold space without panic, it disarms their defenses. They begin to associate connection with calm rather than chaos. That's when communication starts to shift. The goal isn't to fix or rescue them. That's not your role. Your role is to maintain your own center. Understanding that their silence is a coping mechanism gives you emotional leverage. You stop personalizing it. You stop reacting to it. And in that space, something new can happen. You both get to experience stillness without it feeling like rejection. You're no longer battling their silence. You're interpreting it with empathy and responding from strength. When you stop chasing someone who's withdrawn, everything in the dynamic begins to shift. The dismissive avoidant is accustomed to a predictable pattern. They pull away and the other person reaches out. It's a cycle that reassures them on a subconscious level. Their distance gives them a sense of control, while your pursuit confirms that they are still wanted. It's not that they enjoy being pursued in a manipulative way. It's simply what feels safe. They've learned to manage connection by keeping it on their terms. But when you stop playing that role, when you stop chasing and instead meet their silence with your own calm, you quietly rewrite the entire script. At first, this can feel unsettling to them. Your lack of pursuit removes the predictable comfort they've come to rely on. There's a temporary sense of relief. They no longer feel the emotional pressure that made them pull away in the first place. But after that initial relief fades, something more powerful begins to take root. Curiosity. They start to notice the absence of your energy. The person who used to reach out, to check in, to fix things, isn't doing that anymore. And that absence speaks louder than any confrontation could. In that quiet, they're forced to face a feeling they've been avoiding all along, loss. When you no longer rush to repair the distance, they're left to sit with their own side of the silence. They might begin to wonder, did I push too far? Or have they stopped caring? It's often the first time they've had to confront what disconnection really feels like. Your non-reaction becomes a mirror, reflecting the consequences of their withdrawal back to them. That's not manipulation, it's natural cause and effect. For you, the shift is also transformative. You begin to see that you don't have to chase someone to keep a connection alive. By stepping back, you start reclaiming emotional balance. You're no longer reacting to their silence. You're choosing your response. That's where your power lies. It's not about playing hard to get. It's about embodying self-respect. When you no longer feel compelled to fill the silence, you start to experience peace instead of panic. You give yourself permission to be okay, even when they're distant. This is the space where dynamics begin to change. Sometimes your calm silence draws the avoidant person closer because it signals that connection with you isn't dangerous or overwhelming. Other times, it exposes the incompatibility that was always there. Either outcome gives you clarity, but what's certain is that when you stop chasing, you break the unspoken agreement that kept you in emotional imbalance. You shift from reacting to leading, from needing validation to expressing self-worth. And in relationships, that shift doesn't just change how they see you. It changes how you see yourself. The emotional state you hold during silence is often more powerful than anything you could ever say. When both you and a dismissive avoidant go quiet, what determines the future of that silence is not the length of time it lasts, but the energy you bring into it. If your silence comes from panic, fear, or anger, it won't create peace. It will just amplify the emotional noise underneath. But if it comes from calm, confidence, and self-respect, it becomes grounding, not threatening. How you feel in the quiet determines whether that silence connects or separates you. When someone pulls away, it's natural to feel anxiety. Your mind starts racing. Are they done with me? Did I say something wrong? Should I reach out? Those thoughts can turn silence into a storm. You might not speak, but emotionally you're shouting, replaying scenarios, imagining outcomes, grasping for reassurance. That inner chaos leaks through in your energy, your tone, even in your next message. It doesn't matter how composed your words look. If your energy is desperate, they'll feel it. A dismissive avoidant is especially sensitive to emotional pressure. When they sense anxiety or expectation behind your silence, it confirms their fear that closeness equals intensity, and they retreat even further. But when you manage to anchor yourself emotionally, when you sit in silence without spiraling, something powerful happens. Your quiet becomes calm instead of cold. You stop trying to manipulate the moment into resolution. You stop trying to make them understand. Instead, you start focusing inward, regulating your breathing, grounding your thoughts, and reminding yourself that their distance doesn't define your worth. This emotional grounding is magnetic, not because it plays a game, but because it communicates stability. It tells the other person, I'm okay even if you're not here right now. That kind of energy feels safe. The real difference between anxious silence and grounded silence is intention. Anxious silence says, I'm waiting for you to fix this. Grounded silence says, I'm giving both of us space to breathe. One demands resolution, the other invites it. The first pushes the avoidant away. The second gives them room to return. When your emotional state is balanced, your silence becomes an open door rather than a wall. It signals that you're not punishing them. You're respecting yourself. The key is not pretending to be calm, but becoming calm. Pretending is a performance and it always cracks under pressure. Becoming calm means working through your discomfort, owning your emotions, and choosing not to act from fear. When you can hold silence without anxiety controlling you, you stop reacting and start responding. You stop being pulled by the other person's patterns and begin leading from your own grounded center. And that's when silence transforms from a standoff into strength, a quiet confidence that says you no longer need to chase peace because you've already found it within yourself. When silence enters a relationship, it can easily pull you into overthinking, the kind that keeps you replaying every moment, every word, every message that went unanswered. You begin to lose yourself in the narrative of what they might be feeling or why they're not reaching out. But the real opportunity inside that quiet isn't in figuring them out. It's in rediscovering yourself. When someone goes silent, it creates a void, and you get to decide what fills it, fear or self-connection. Most people use that silence to obsess over the other person's behavior. They analyze timing, tone, and motive, trying to decode meaning in every pause. But the truth is, the silence between you isn't just about them, it's also a mirror. It reflects back how you handle uncertainty, how you manage your own emotions, and how deeply you rely on someone else's attention to feel secure. If you can learn to face that mirror without judgment, the silence becomes a teacher. It invites you to ask bigger questions. What part of me is uncomfortable with not knowing? Why does distance feel like danger? What am I afraid will happen if I don't get a response? Turning your focus inward doesn't mean ignoring the other person or pretending you don't care. It means using the quiet to build emotional independence. Instead of waiting for someone else to soothe you, you start learning how to soothe yourself. You begin to reconnect with your own rhythm, your hobbies, your friends, your peace. You remind yourself that your world doesn't shrink to the size of one relationship. That's how you turn a powerless pause into a powerful reset. Reconnecting with yourself during silence also helps you see the situation more clearly. When you're anxious, you interpret everything through a lens of fear. You assume the worst, take their withdrawal personally, and react from insecurity. But when you use the space to ground yourself, your perception sharpens. You start to see patterns, not just theirs, but yours. Maybe you notice that you tend to chase when you feel unwanted, or that you equate closeness with safety. Awareness like that doesn't just heal you. It changes the way you show up in every future relationship. There's also something quietly magnetic about someone who can stay composed in silence. It communicates emotional maturity. When you don't scramble to fill the space or demand attention, it shows that you trust yourself. That kind of energy can shift the entire connection because it signals that you're not dependent, you're choosing. And that choice creates balance where there used to be imbalance. So when a dismissive avoidant retreats and you're tempted to close the gap, pause, let the silence be an invitation, not a punishment. Let it guide you back to your center, because when you use that space to rebuild your connection to yourself, you stop waiting for peace from someone else. You start generating it on your own. When two people go silent, it often feels like a waiting game, a question of who will break first, who will reach out, who will care enough to close the distance. But the truth is, silence isn't about winning or losing. It's about revealing. It shows you where the relationship stands, not through words, but through actions or the lack of them. When a dismissive, avoidant person goes quiet and you respond with your own calm silence, what happens next tells you everything about your compatibility. It's not a test to see who can stay silent longer, but a moment that clarifies whether both people are capable of meeting each other emotionally. If the other person eventually comes back with openness, ready to talk, to understand, to reconnect, that's a sign of emotional growth. It shows that space has given them clarity, that your lack of pressure allowed them to reflect instead of defend. In that case, silence became a reset, a necessary pause that led to balance. You both learned how to hold your boundaries without breaking the bond. You learned that love doesn't always need constant noise. Sometimes it breathes best in stillness, but sometimes silence simply confirms the truth that one person is willing to do the emotional work and the other isn't. If they stay distant, indifferent, or unresponsive, it's not necessarily a punishment, it's information. Their continued silence reveals their limits, not your inadequacy. It shows you that connection for them means safety in distance, while for you, it means presence and communication. That difference isn't something you can fix with effort or love. It's a matter of emotional compatibility. When you reach this understanding, the silence no longer feels like rejection. It feels like clarity. This is where emotional maturity becomes crucial. Instead of framing the silence as they won or I lost, you start to see it as a moment of truth. Relationships that require you to constantly chase connection or decode withdrawal are not sustainable. They drain your energy and distort your sense of self. When you can sit in the quiet and observe rather than react, you give yourself the gift of perspective. You're no longer measuring your value by whether someone returns. You're remeasuring it by how peacefully you can stay grounded in uncertainty. If they come back and are willing to communicate, that's an opportunity to rebuild with understanding. But if they don't, your silence will have done something even more important. It will have protected your dignity. You didn't beg, plead, or lose yourself trying to force a response. You allowed the situation to reveal itself naturally. That's how silence becomes powerful. It teaches you that love isn't proven by pursuit, it's proven by reciprocity. You can't build connection alone. And when you can accept that truth without resentment, silence stops being the end. It becomes the beginning of self-respect. When both people go silent, it's easy to mistake that quiet for emptiness. But it's not empty at all. It's full of truth. It shows you where the connection stands, who's willing to grow, and what kind of peace you're capable of holding on your own. Silence, when used consciously, becomes one of the most powerful teachers in love. It teaches you patience, presence, and the difference between attachment and alignment. You start to understand that love doesn't have to mean chasing, proving, or rescuing. Sometimes real love is the courage to stay still, to trust that what's meant for you won't need constant convincing to stay. When a dismissive avoidant retreats and you stop chasing, you create space, not just between you and them, but within yourself. And that space is sacred. It's where clarity lives. It's where you rediscover your strength, your value, and your ability to feel whole. Even when connection fades, you begin to realize that silence isn't your enemy. It's your mirror. It reflects your growth, your boundaries, and your willingness to choose peace over panic. So when the silence comes, and it will in every relationship at some point, don't fear it. Listen to it. Let it show you what words can't. Because the one who can hold stillness with grace, who can stay calm when others withdraw, becomes the person who attracts not chaos, but calm. You become someone who doesn't beg to be chosen. You stand as someone worth choosing. Thank you for listening, for staying with me through this conversation about silence, space, and self-worth. If there's one thing I hope you take away, it's this. When connection grows quiet, it's not always the end. Sometimes it's just the space where you finally begin to hear yourself again. And that, more than anything, is where real love starts, with you. Thank you. Take care of your heart. And remember, peace is never found in noise. It's found in how you handle the quiet.